Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. I'm Chanel Nielsen, your host, and today is a special day on the podcast because we are celebrating our 2-year podcast anniversary. It has been an awesome 2 years, and I am just so humbled and thankful and just so glad to be a part of Moms Who Know and to host this podcast, yes, but also to be building these relationships, both with the people I have on the podcast and also with you guys. I love when you reach out and tell me that an episode meant something to you. When you're podcasting, you're alone in, your office, or my office has recently moved to my bedroom. And I'm all by myself, and yet I'm having these conversations with people, and then it's affecting the lives of other people. And it's amazing. And so thank you for being a part of it and for reaching out and letting me know when these episodes mean something to you. It really means something to me. So thank you for that. Today's episode is going to be 7 lessons that I have learned in these past 2 years of podcasting. Now, these are life lessons and not necessarily only relevant if you are starting a podcast, but I hope that there will be something here for you that you'll be able to take away and apply to your own life. And so let's dive right in. Number 1, it's important to do hard things. So for me, 2 years ago, starting this podcast was a hard thing. There was so much to learn on the technical end. Just all of that was a big learning curve, and figuring out how to promote it and get it out there and figuring out all the logistics and everything I needed to do, that was huge. But probably the hardest part of all for me of starting this podcast was the emotional and the vulnerability. I've shared before that before I started Moms Who Know, I had a podcast, and it was sponsored by a company that I work for, and it was broadcast in China. And I loved the fact that it was in China because I felt like I could share whatever I wanted and not have to really worry too much about being vulnerable or putting myself out there, because I knew that the people listening would never meet me in real life. And there was no fear of people that I actually knew listening to me. And for whatever reason, that was a really scary thing for me. And when I first started this podcast, that was one of the reasons I didn't want to do it. Like, what if people I know listen to this podcast? And now a lot of people I know listen to this podcast. And I've just learned to open myself up in that way. But that was a hard thing for me. It's been a growing and a stretching process. And I'm so grateful for it, because in the process of doing that, I have changed, and I've allowed myself with this topic specifically, I've allowed myself to be seen. I've gotten over that idea that I have to hide out or not really share certain parts of myself, that it's okay to just be me, and whoever listens, whether they're in China or local, that's okay. And so that's been a hard thing that I've done that has been so amazing for me and been really changed the way that I approach life. Okay, number 2 is you are your own biggest critic. So I think part of the reason that I felt so concerned about sharing myself in this way was because it's so easy to look at yourself, the things you say and the things that you do, and to be critical and harsh on yourself. And to think, that was so dorky. Why did I say that? And if you've never done a podcast before, I can pretty much guarantee anyone who has podcasted will probably agree with this. After the podcast is over and you have recorded this episode, you may feel, whatever you feel in the moment, but as time goes on, there's this little voice that comes in and says, oh man, you said that was so dorky. Why did you say that? Oh, I hope we can edit that out. Maybe we should go back and take that part out. And all these thoughts and all these concerns about your own mistakes. And the truth is, they're there. There are lots of mistakes in this podcast and every podcast that I do. But what I've realized is you guys aren't listening just for my mistakes and just to point out when I'm a dork, right? You're listening for what's there for you. And that's exactly how it should be. And if you can get over the messenger and get to the message and listen to what's really there for you, then it's going to be powerful, even if I say something really lame. And that's the point, right? The point is, I need to get out this message and I need to get over myself in doing it, because I'm the one who's worried that I'm going to say something wrong or dumb. And really, you're just listening for what you can take away. And so that's been a powerful thing for me too, to recognize that people aren't trying to listen for my mistakes so they can critique me. And I think sometimes, so often, we are so worried about that. I see that with my kids as they get older and they start becoming more self-aware. They're really concerned, what other people will think. And some of that stays with us into adulthood. And the more we can get over that and get over ourselves, the more we can bless the lives of others. So that's been helpful, a helpful lesson for me through this last couple years of podcasting. Number 3, everyone has something to share. So this has been just something that I love so much. People reach out to me a lot. As the podcast has grown, I get a lot of requests to be on the podcast, which I love. If you have something to share, please reach out. With that being said, I might not be able to have you on the show because I do have so many requests. I have to really pick and choose what is the best fit. But I've realized that, everyone has a story and everyone has a different way of saying things. And sometimes I'll get people who want to be on the show with very similar messages. So someone will say, I want to be on the show and talk about, self-care through exercise. And then someone else will say, well, I want to be on the show and talk about how women can take care of themselves and be really fit. Well, obviously, those are almost the same exact things. But the truth is, when we have the conversation, everyone's voice and everyone's way of getting their message and their story across is so different. And there are little bits that come out for people in such different ways. And so that's why it's so important for everyone to share whatever it is they have been given. Maybe not in this format. Maybe it's just with your friends or through writing or whatever platform you've been given. Maybe that's giving a talk at church or telling your kids or writing your own personal history. There are 1,000 ways that you can do this, but never think that your voice doesn't matter. Everyone has a story. Everyone has something to share. I've also realized that sometimes people with a big social media following, they are amazing guests also. But sometimes even if people have just a tiny social media following, or they don't even have a social media, that's not even their thing. They just have this life experience, and them sharing it is so powerful, whether they've ever shared it before or not, whether they're a professional speaker, sharer of their story, or they're just someone who I know or was connected with. And those have been some really powerful episodes of people who are not famous, people who are not out there in this platform, but who are willing to share. Everyone has a story. Number 4. This one is a little bit different, but this is something that has been a powerful lesson for me, which is working ahead takes away the stress. So in addition to hosting this podcast, I host another podcast called Read With You Presents, which is about education and childhood literacy. And I do that for a company called Read With You. I have 5 kids. One of them is not in school yet. He's a 2-year-old. I am busy with church responsibilities and just lots of things. We have a full and rich and busy life. And I know that for me, if I leave my podcast to the end and say, I have a podcast, my podcast day is Monday, right? So if I'm working on Friday and Saturday and scrambling to get that podcast out by Monday, and I have to sacrifice family time, it feels like a stress and it doesn't feel very fun. And I get worried and concerned and I don't have time for my family. When I am able to work ahead and get things scheduled, and I am a pre-planner. Anything I can get scheduled ahead of time makes such a difference. So I schedule the podcast ahead of time. I schedule my social media ahead of time. I schedule everything that I can ahead of time so that I have a little bit of space in my life. And that has been so powerful for me, because what it does for me is it allows me to be present with my kids. It allows me to really listen to what my family needs and gives me the space to respond to that. Because when they come to me and I'm up against a deadline for the podcast, I can't respond to that. I can't give them what they need because I've got to take care of my stuff. It also lets me have fun and be spontaneous with friends and family and say, if something fun comes up, I'm flexible enough that I can go and do that. And so getting to that place, whatever that means for each of us, to work ahead a little bit to take the stress out. And I want to say, this has a lot of applications, and I want to make sure and touch on those because this isn't just about podcasting. One of the applications that comes to mind is, as a mom, dinner is always stressful. I hear that from moms all the time, that dinner hour just feels so hard sometimes, and it does feel very stressful. And a lot of times our kids need us at that time. Everyone's hungry and tired, and we've got dinner to make. Well, one way that we can make that part of our lives easier is to make dinners and put them in the freezer ahead of time and simplify our meals. And if we know we have a dinner in the freezer, then when we're out playing with our kids at the park and everyone's having a great time, we don't have to say, oh, let's go, mom's got to go make dinner. We can stay and play and just enjoy the moment a little bit longer. And there are lots of other ways that we could probably apply that, but just working ahead, whatever you can do to create that space is going to take away some of that stress. And that's been a big lesson that I've learned over the course of podcasting, because I've done it both ways, and I know the way I like it better, which is definitely to work ahead. Number 5, be in the moment. So when I do my podcast recordings with guests, I usually send them a list of general ideas. So some talking points. We're going to talk about, these 4 or so things. I don't send them a list of questions. And the reason that I do that is because I feel like my job as a podcast host is to be a listener. I want to listen to what they are saying, and I want to ask them the questions that naturally come up for me and that I feel like come up for all of you who are listening. When I hear something unexpected, I want to follow up on that. And I feel like by doing that, we get some really good stuff that maybe people haven't said before. Some of the people who have been on the podcast have been interviewed so many times, and they're kind of a standard. There's, standard responses that they have, and that's great, but it's so fun when you can dig a little deeper and get a little more from people, because I think we learn that way, and you can hear the excitement in the guest's voice as well, as they're starting to share something that maybe they hadn't thought of in quite that way before. So it's really been a skill that I have worked to develop, to really listen and to be in the moment. And that is something that, goes beyond just podcasting, because it's important with our kids and really everywhere we go to listen and not to be so focused on, a plan, what did I have planned to say, but where is this conversation going and where can it go and what is possible in this conversation? And so that's been a really fun one for me as a podcast host. Number 6, we're not collecting ideas, we are affecting change. Let me explain what I mean by that. We live in this information age where we have so much information always coming in. We have access to answers to any question that we want to know. And through podcasts and books and movies and all these things, we are constantly learning, and it is amazing. I love learning and I love gaining knowledge. But I think that it's really important to consider that we're not just collecting ideas. Maybe we are, but that's not the point, is not to just collect ideas. When we learn this stuff, are we taking the next step? I did a podcast on this a while back and talked about the idea of when we need to listen, we need to learn, and then we digest the information, breaking it down to what does this mean for me? And then we implement it. That step, implementing, having change in our life, that's what makes the information important to us. That's what makes it relevant. That's what matters. So you can listen to every podcast and read every book by every guru. But if at the end of the day, you don't change your life because of what you've learned, it doesn't mean much. It's really about making change. And so for me, as a podcaster, I am having these conversations. I am, being in touch with these people, these amazing people. And I try to really think, and I hope that you see this on my social media as I try to go next level. Like, okay, so I learned about this. So now what? What does this mean for me? What am I going to do differently? Maybe it's just a way I'm going to think differently. Maybe it's a way I'm going to organize my day differently. Maybe it's something I'm going to start doing that I wasn't doing before, or stop doing that I have been doing. It always looks different, right? But if it does not change us in some way, then we're kind of missing the point. So we're not collecting ideas. We are working to change our life. And the final one, number 7, it's not about the numbers, it's about the people. This has been a lesson that I've had to learn and relearn over the last 2 years, because it's so easy to get caught up in how many people are listening to the podcast, or how many people are following on social media, or those kind of things. And I remember Monica Packer, she hosts the About Progress podcast. She and I had a conversation, and she said, think about, and I think someone shared this with her, what if all the people that were listening to your podcast were in a room to listen to you? That would be amazing. Like, it's easy to overlook, to look at the numbers and say, oh, well, it's not that many, it's not that big. But picture those people sitting in a room. And for me, that's been a really valuable mindset shift for a couple reasons. So one is because it seems a lot bigger picturing them in a room than looking at numbers on a screen. But the reason, even more, the deeper reason, is because when I picture people listening, even if it was just a handful of people, those people matter. And what is happening to them, to you, because of the things that you hear on this podcast, that's the exciting thing. It doesn't matter if it's a stadium full of, so many people. What matters is that something that I am sharing and that I am a part of is getting to the heart of someone. And so it's something that it's easy to get caught up, I think, for all of us in this idea of numbers, but that is not what it's all about. It's not about the numbers. It is about the people. I hope you feel that for me, and that you know that this is about what I can do to serve and to share good things and to share good messages. I have loved doing this podcast for the last 2 years. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to give us a podcast anniversary gift, I would love to have that from you. And I'm going to tell you a couple of things that you could do to help celebrate our 2-year anniversary. One is leave a rating and review on the podcast. If you haven't done that already, you can go to iTunes and just leave a review and tell us what you like about the podcast. And a 5-star rating would be much appreciated as well. Another thing you can do is to share the podcast. This goes for any time. If there's an episode that is meaningful to you, share it. Share it on social media or with a friend, or just, let someone know about Moms Who Know. And that is super helpful to me. The other thing you can do is to follow on social media and to join in the conversation. I love, love, love hearing from you and hearing what stands out to you. That also helps me to get better and better content because I know which podcast episodes are the most meaningful, and we can kind of continue to have content that is the most meaningful to you guys. So I hope that you will participate, share our podcast anniversary with us, and thank you for listening to Moms Who Know. One last thing, I almost forgot to ask the discussion question of the week. So this week, I would love to know, what is your lesson from the podcast? What have you learned? If there's an episode that stands out, something that you've heard that has changed something for you, or just takeaways from the podcast in general, things that have helped you, please, please, please let me know. Share that on Instagram or Facebook at Moms Who Know Podcast. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week on Moms Who Know.